After his first career victory, we're pretty proud to say that George Russell won our hearts. We already knew that the F1 driver was the future of Mercedes, especially after his performance this season, but he proved himself once again. As for Daniel Ricciardo, who seems like a potential reserve driver for the team, he literally crashed out on the first lap of the same race. So what's going on with the Mercedes team? Let's find out. First off, George Russell got Mercedes their first win for the season. It's fair to say it was a drama-filled Sao Paulo Grand Prix, and the Briton managed to secure Mercedes' first triumph of the year with a classy performance. Now, starting from the first, let's just say Russell never seemed threatened, as Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and Charles Leclerc were all involved in collisions. But he definitely survived a late scare, right when a safety car was deployed late in the race, which left him with a 12-lap sprint to the finish. In fact, he said, "I felt in control. Lewis was super fast, and when I saw the safety car, I thought, oh Jesus, this is going to be a very difficult end." As for Hamilton, he came in second, and Ferrari's Carlos Sainz managed to come third. Honestly, can we just say that it's been nothing short of an emotional roller coaster for the drivers and the fans? It was definitely one of the most memorable races of the season. Having said that, Russell just became the 113th driver in F1 history to win a Grand Prix. And let's not forget, it's also the first time God Save the King was played for a winning driver in F1. Following up, Daniel Ricciardo seemed to have a pretty hard time. Let's just start by saying that this was his second to last race for McLaren, which pretty much ended on the opening lap, right after he crashed into the Haas of Kevin Magnussen. It turns out he couldn't seem to slow his car down quickly enough into one of the sharp left-hand corners at Interlagos, and so he ended up hitting the rear of Magnussen's car instead. Basically, the Australian was trying to overtake him up the inside at turn 9, but soon ran into trouble. In fact, after the collision, both cars suffered extensive damage. As for the Danish driver, who, by the way, took the first pole position of his career this weekend, simply spun around and then collected Ricciardo as they both went into the barriers. And if we're being honest about the crash, it's pretty obvious whose fault it was. In fact, former F1 driver turned commentator Martin Brundle said that the crash was 100% Ricciardo's fault. There's no doubt there. With that said, all of this chaos brought out a safety car that lasted right until the end of lap 6 before racing resumed. Not to mention, there was a lot more drama waiting for McLaren. Obviously, it didn't end there. The incident was investigated with officials involved. And trust us when we say this, they're coming down hard on the Australian. Right now, he's been given a 3-place grid penalty for next weekend's race in Abu Dhabi, which, by the way, is the season finale and his very last race with McLaren. Plus, he's also been hit with a 2-point penalty. And the drama for McLaren didn't just end there. It turns out Lando Norris was literally forced to retire with engine trouble, which blew up the team's chances of grabbing the 4th spot in the Constructors' Championship. In fact, Norris literally lost power and pulled off to the side of the track. And after marshals weren't able to move the McLaren out of the way safely, they called in a full safety car. Coming up, there were even more collisions and penalties. Let's just say that once that green flag was waved, it brought in even more drama when Verstappen and Hamilton started coming together. And let's not forget McLaren's Lando Norris and Ferrari's Leclerc. Verstappen needed to do it after his contact with the 7-time champion. As for Leclerc, he was spun into the barriers. It turns out the Ferrari driver managed to keep his car running and get back to the pits. Having said that, Verstappen and Norris were given 5-second penalties for each collision. But when he talked to his team about it, the 2-time champ said, "Where did they expect me to go? He just closed the door on me." Either way, he was able to recover to 6th, while Leclerc managed to climb to an impressive 4th position. Not to mention, Ricciardo isn't any closer to making a final call. His negotiations still haven't reached a final deal, after Ricciardo told reporters at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix that he still hasn't confirmed anything. Instead, he said he has nothing to hide, and he's pretty transparent about his opportunities and discussions. Even from a contractual point of view, if something was done, he'd be telling us because there's nothing holding him back. Ricciardo's contract with McLaren was terminated a year early, and he didn't have a lot of competitive options lined up for him. And with that, he decided to take a year off from the sport and focus on a 2024 comeback with hopefully better options. But off the record, he seems pretty inclined towards the reserve driver role with either Red Bull or Mercedes, or at least he was, because it turns out the Australian doesn't seem very interested in the Red Bull deal after all. In fact, there's a surprising twist. McLaren could even ask him to stay as a backup. Now, we didn't see that coming, but here's the thing. When you ask Ricciardo, he says he still hasn't come around to finalizing anything, and it's left fans guessing the best move for him, based on whatever we know. Now, the Australian was a Red Bull driver right before he left for Renault, so now he could provide backup for Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez in 2023, just to stay visible until his return to the grid in 2024. Because, let's face it, while a year off to refocus and rebuild yourself seems like a great opportunity, does he really want to risk going off the grid entirely for a whole season? Coming up, McLaren offered Ricciardo a reserve driver role for 2023, right after they ended his contract a year earlier than intended. After 2 disappointing seasons, they decided to hold him back with a reserve driver role. And while McLaren team principal Andreas Seidel definitely talked about keeping the doors open for Ricciardo, they haven't really properly discussed it yet. If anything, they're going to iron out the details over the winter, because they've got an agreement with other teams as well to share reserve drivers. But then again, he says there aren't any hard feelings between the Australian and the team, so anything is possible at this point. Are you sure, Seidel? Having said that, everyone's got to point out that Ricciardo isn't just a great driver, but he's also got a great personality that's always missed when he leaves. And the McLaren team principal had the same thing to say about him. As for the last few races, they tried to put their best performances out there, but like we saw at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, that didn't work out so great for them. With that said, Seidel refused to talk about any rumors about Ricciardo's future plans. Instead, he just said whoever ends up getting Ricciardo for their team, they're going to get what McLaren got, and that's a great driver with a great personality. Finally, Mick Schumacher and Daniel Ricciardo's 2023 decisions are linked. Right before the Brazilian Grand Prix weekend, there were rumors going around that Haas had already decided they'd be going with Nico Hülkenberg after Schumacher dropped from the lineup. In fact, the team principal, Gunther Steiner, even confirmed at the last constructors press conference that they've already decided, and we're all going to find out soon enough. If he loses his Haas seat, Schumacher's 2023 plans might rely on what Ricciardo decides for himself, because both drivers are up for the Mercedes reserve driver role. And let's just say that their place on next year's grid isn't guaranteed. Now, while the Australians already settled for a reserve driver role, or even a year off, Schumacher, on the other hand, needs to consider the possibility that he's not going to get any good news from his team. Talking about the 8-time Grand Prix winner, Mercedes isn't looking for a replacement anymore after Hamilton and Russell locked in their deals with Toto Wolff. As for Red Bull, he's got a pretty good chance of replacing Sergio Perez if the driver fails to impress. And if he's not available for Mercedes, Schumacher's going to be the team's first choice. So that probably works out best for the two of them, right? Except that Ricciardo still isn't interested in the Red Bull offer, so we're not too sure he's going to take it up. That's a wrap for this video. How do you feel about George Russell's performance this season? And which team do you think he's going to sign a deal with? Red Bull, Mercedes, or McLaren? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.